Good evening, good evening. It is just gone 10 past 6 on the 23rd of January 2025. I'm David Zidel, and I'd like to welcome you to the Ort Jet Business Show. Last week was our first week, and if you weren't listening, I just want to explain to you how the program works. So first of all, I'll give you some input around some business, something just to think about, something that'll hopefully spark your cells, your brain cells into thinking slightly differently, maybe about business. And then we'll go into a chat, and we always have somebody in studio chatting to us about their business or what they're doing in business with some lessons. And tonight we've got Jon Foster Pedley, who's the CEO and the Dean and Director of the Henley Business School. So we'll unpack that in a moment. But just the key lesson to start off with, and it's an interesting story that happened to me. So almost about 2 years ago, I had a serious knee operation. And I came out of the operation and I was lying in the bed, and I had looked at my legs and they were completely bandaged. And right at the bottom of each leg, there was like an orange bandage that looked very different to the rest. And I was kind of wondering what that was. And then I asked one of the nurses, what is that bandage for? And I was explained that needs to contract and expand. It like keeps the blood flowing, because after an operation, it's crucial that the blood flows through, that you don't get clots. So although it looked like a very simple thing, it was quite crucial to maybe even my survival. And I couldn't feel these contractions that I was told that these bandages do. And I thought maybe it's just the anesthetic wearing off. And eventually I called the nurse and I asked her, how come I'm not feeling this? Am I meant to feel it working? And she had a look at it and said, oh, the other nurse had put it on, but had forgot to turn it on. So although she had done what she was supposed to do, it wasn't working the way it should have been done. And I got to think like that in all businesses, things like that happen. And it's when somebody's doing something and they don't know the why. They don't understand why they're doing it. What's the greater implication of what they're meant to be doing? So for you in your business, whatever you're doing, it's about you understanding why you're doing it, and the people you work with understanding why they're doing it. Because a lot of people are busy in what they're doing, but they're kind of more in busyness rather than in business, because they're not doing it as efficiently as they could because they don't understand the why. And that why is spoken a lot by a guy that maybe you've heard of. It's Simon Sinek, who came out with something called the Golden Circle. And in the middle is the why. And he says that's core to your business. The what and the how can follow later on from that. So if you know your why, you can have more motivation, you do it correctly, and you know more what it's about. And that leads to one last story of a guy's watching three people banging nails into wood on a roof. And he says to the first guy, what are you doing? And he says, I'm hammering a nail into wood. He says to the other guy, what are you doing? He says, I'm building a roof. He says to the third guy, what are you doing? And he says, I'm building a church. The guy who feels that he's building a place of worship has got a lot more motivation than the guy who thinks he's just banging nails into wood. So whatever you're doing, find the passion for it. Find the bigger reason why you're doing it. And that's maybe an indication that you could be a lot more successful in it. So, Jon, that's kind of an educational message, and you live in the educational world. And I'm going to ask you a lot of questions around that. But just for the listeners, I want to go through a little bit of what you shared before, and then we can pick up on a couple of those things.
Sure.
So the slogan for the Henley Business School is, we build the people who build the businesses that build Africa. And Henley has become the #1 business school. I think it's in Africa.
Well, I'd hate to claim that because a lot of people would be less than happy if I did, but we've done really well and we've got a fantastic reputation.
So definitely in South Africa and maybe further on.
Well, let's keep around there.
Okay. So Jon was born into an RAF family. He was born in a station in England. He was the son of an ace fighter pilot. He then got a scholarship to the RAF Academy. And if he followed the route that his father had for him, it was all mapped out beautifully. And then, as Jon says, he dropped out of his privileged life and he got interested in real life. And he lived a life kind of like a hippie life, and he joined an Indian ashram. And to survive, he had to do odd jobs. And he'd done over 41 different jobs. And some of them were strange jobs, cleaning things. And all of these jobs, Jon says, that in the end helped him to grow to what he is today and to understand it. And at the age of 28, he decided that he wants to combine two of his loves. And that was his newfound ability to do sales, which he was very good at through some of the jobs that he had done, and to get back into the aircraft and the flying world. And he wanted to become an aircraft instructor. And so he started selling or trying to sell different airplanes, used airplanes. And in fact, I'll pick up on the story a little bit later. I thought was fascinating, is there was a magazine talking about aircraft. And in the same magazine was somebody looking for an airplane, and a few pages later, somebody selling the airplane. And Jon went along and did the deal when they were both advertising in the same magazine. And that's finding opportunities that maybe others don't find. He then decided, as I said, he wants to become a flying instructor. He didn't have the money, went to a bank. The bank said, what surety have you got? He said he has no surety. And the bank manager asked him a whole lot of different questions and then gave him the loan. And I think, Jon, you didn't understand why you had even been given the loan. And years later, you met someone who explained to you
That's right.
that manager used what they call the Campari method. Now, it's not Campari that he had the drink, Campari, but it is looking at your character and your ability and the margins that you're going to make and a whole lot of other things, which we will unpack what that Campari is, because maybe it's a lesson that we can all use. Just to complete the story before I start talking to Jon, he then became a commercial pilot and sold airlines, and then was sponsored to do an MBA, did very well in that, enjoyed the strategy aspect, joined UCT at the business school, was successful there, and then finally joined the Henley Business School in 2010. And that's only 15 years ago. And at that time, there were only 5 employees. And that year, they'd graduated 30 students.
That's right.
And wow, what a difference it is today, where last year you graduated just over 2,000 students. So Jon, welcome and thank you for joining us. And I must also say, congratulations. It's Jon's anniversary.
22nd anniversary to
22nd
Carla,
anniversary.
Dr. Carla.
Dr. Carlos.
And my kids, Ayanda and Kira, are at home, I hope, and we're all going to get together later. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic.
Thank you, Dave.
So congratulations on that. We're going to go for an ad break, but when we come back, I'd like you to pick up any aspect of what we've mentioned and see what are some of the things that you learned and maybe what others can learn from what you've learned. Welcome back. I'm David Zidel. You're listening to the Ort Jet Business Show, and we're talking to Jon Foster Pedley, who is the Dean and Director of the Henley Business School. So Jon, just before the break, I gave that whole story about you, and I've given your story basically. Anything on that you want to pick up on and discuss?
Yeah, thank you very much, David. It's such a pleasure to be here. Really is. And well, there's so much to it. You know, I started off with a very privileged background in a sense, a very middle class, very privileged. And at a certain point, I realized that there was so much more out there, and I did drop out and do a number of things for different years. But it was incredibly formative. I sort of crossed my inherited class barrier, met very diverse sort of people from different professions, different backgrounds, whether they're criminals through to CEOs and architects. And I had to learn to really thrive on my own initiative and find my own way. And having thrown all that away, much to the really distress of my parents and my poor dad and mum, and it was quite trendy at the time to do so, but I then fought my way back, as it were, through doing multiple jobs until I really, having been through that Hindu ashram phase and learning meditation, which I thought was a really good thing to do, and I still try and practice now. I then said, well, it's time I got back into life, and what can I do? I could fly pretty well, I could sell things pretty well, so I got this job selling used airplanes and lots of stories around that. And I worked my way through to get my instructor's ratings, my flying hours, in a very long process with absolutely nothing. I mean, I had no money at all. That was my choice or foolishness. But having done that and having had an aim and having worked step by step by step by doing whatever came my way and throwing myself at it and not being put down and trying to just persist whatever hit me, I learned, I think, quite a lot of resilience. And I had the enormous satisfaction of being very broke for a long time, owing money to Barclays Bank. Thank you, Mr. Berman. That's a true story. I'm so grateful to him. And then I paid that back over a number of years in different flying jobs, bush flying, charter flying, whatever. But just having a totally different life where I had done it in my own terms and I'd found my own kind of way to make things happen. I got a huge amount of confidence that I could do that into an airline job, to an airline captain. And then beyond that, having paid back all the money, I'm pleased to say. And I think just that doing it yourself and believing you can do it yourself gave me an awful lot of confidence that it's not what you know, it's how well you learn. If you can learn your way through things, you've got resilience and you're confident at learning in real life, you can actually grapple anything, but with anything. You don't have to know it. You know you're going to learn what you need to know. And it's like a superpower to have that. And it gives you so many options and choices. I hope all my children aren't necessarily listening. I rather feel I'd like them to go the university route, which they're doing very well. But I think it's having that sense that you can do things, and it grinds you down in a way. It kind of takes a lot of rough edges off you. But it also gives you a really kind of tough interior, which is not hard towards people, but tough towards yourself. And you realize you can do things. And I think that's a really important lesson for people to have. I think entrepreneurs do that, and I think a lot of driven people do. But what I realize also that we're all the same principle. We're all very ordinary. I'm a very ordinary person. You may not be. Take our brains out, they all look exactly the same. We're only one human species, Homo sapiens, that currently exists with a little bit of Florensis and Neanderthal still stuck in there somewhere. But we're all very ordinary, and there's a real power in being ordinary. And people don't know, I want to be exceptional, I want to be special. No, actually embrace your ordinariness, because what we have is good enough to do anything you want in life, really, if you just apply it and use it. You don't need some superpower. It's all in you anyway. It's just a matter of time and practice and belief and optimism. And you really will get there or somewhere and allow life to take you off track sometimes and live with that, yeah.
So it sounded like you needed to break away and to do other things to build, as you call it, this resilience and to have the confidence that you can cope with yourself.
Well, I think you brought up a lot of confidence to begin with. So if you I came down, as you said, my dad was a very well-decorated war hero, and we lived on air force stations. In fact, I was born on one, senior officer, and had a lot of character to himself. Now, I think you're born with that. I knew nothing about business or politics or life, really. I was boarding school brat. And I think what you learn is that you don't need all those props of whatever you're given to make your own life. Don't get me wrong, it really helps you in some ways. But it also comes with blinkers. It also comes with the fear that you can't get out of that, and you can very easily get trapped in it. And I was very lucky to be a student at the time after I left military college, and I was a young Air Force officer. A student at the time in a very revolutionary period of European history, where people were challenging what's going on in the Vietnam War. They were challenging the conformance, they were challenging the extreme middle classes and ordinaries of sort of British life at the time, really austere after the Second World War. And there was a time, thanks to what our parents had sacrificed, actually, gave us the opportunity to break out and be different. We never realized that at the time. You know, those sacrifices gave us generations of relative peace, funny enough, which I only think now is starting to break down. And I think it's, you know, breaking out of that conditioning is scary, and there were times when it was really hard. But it just shows you that, you know, as I said, you can do a heck of a lot more, and you can grasp and look at life. You can look at people very different from yourselves. You don't have to fight back when somebody thinks differently from yourself or even challenges you. You can just say, how curious, how interesting. If I can absorb your very different worldview, if I can understand how you think like that, I'm clearly going to be more rounded in my thinking. I'm going to have more to my armor if I do that. And I think that is very important to learn how to do.
And that's what true education is. But we'll get back to that in a second. I just want to go back to your 41 jobs that you had. Can you just unpack some of the unusual ones, and maybe if you can think, what did that job teach you? What were the strange ones?
Well, I think I was brought up in a very, you know, in a house. We had woods out the back, and we lived, you know, outdoors and sailing and fishing, all that sort of thing. We did a lot of it. But my parents never gave us money. You know, they gave us a good education. They gave us a sense of resilience. They gave us a sense of character. You have to go and do things. And so from a very early age, if I needed money, I would go and do it. I'd be a railway porter at Christmas, or I'd post, you know, do the post office, or work in a boutique, or work in a kennel, helping clean up kennels for hundreds of dogs and cats, or in a watercress farm, or a mushroom farm to shut it. All hard jobs, but interesting. And in the culture I came from, these, you know, if you were a young person, it was okay to do these jobs. There wasn't any real stigma or anything to do it. In fact, it was felt to be character building. And of course, we had money, and when you earn money yourself, you got it in your hand, you think, wow, that's something. It's not much. I did window cleaning with one of my best friends. And of course, we would spend all the money we made after climbing up these ladders on going to the pub and playing the, you know, football and having a beer, and then going off and doing some more afterwards. And so we would spend it, but it was so engaging to think that you had the freedom to go and take these jobs and do things. So I did a number of very interesting and odd jobs at different times. I cleaned a nuclear power station once when I was hitchhiking around Europe, and you know, and I did dog walking at one time, and cleaned flats. And then other times I did very, very different things. I worked for a medical company later on, where we were selling medical appliances, and I had to go to some really tough clinics. And some of these clinics were people who'd had ileostomy, and they had ileostomy and colostomy bags, which we don't talk about. And I think, wow, what is this? But it was one of the most moving periods of my life, because I would go to the clinics in the Children's Hospital in Great Ormond Street, and we go to special clinics where these kids were born with these defects. You'd see the nursing staff, what they would do for them. You would see what the doctors would do for them. You'd see them recover, or you would have this poor person in their mid-40s had to have this procedure. They would ask me, a person in my 20s, how do I handle this? And of course, we were told how to help in some way, and we would give some advice or steer them in the right place. It was incredibly humbling, and also very, very clear that life is short, life is temporary. You know, don't take anything for granted, and nobody's there to give you anything. You're going to have to make your own way. And that was incredibly empowering, tough but empowering, and allowed one to see so much more of life, and then started thinking, well, I understand how entrepreneurs work a bit better now. I mean, I have huge respect for entrepreneurs. Incredible. I mean, how they actually get up and do things and take those risks and make it happen. It's something else. And I think that was so formative. And I really wish people had more chance to do those and weren't scared to break away what they had to do, because they engage with people across class, across society in very, very different ways when you're working with them. And I learned more about work in that times when I was, you know, spending a bit of time learning about, you know, Indian spirituality, which was also very, very much a vogue at the time. And if I could just say one thing, one of the things about that was you would do satsang, which was talking about what you believed in, service, which was where you go and work, and your work was service to something more important than you. It was service to try and help people, to help community, to help the world. You would really have that sense. And I know that I'm sure the different faiths have different way of describing that. I think it's called Rosy in Islam and something else. And but that would be a sense as your work is not just about you and your acquisitiveness. It's about the way you contribute and engage with life, and you make a difference to community. And that was something that stuck with me and is incredibly real right now. And I think it's one of the things that's helped us do something really good with Henley, because we truly, truly believe we're doing good for people through that work.
So that that feeds back to the story I gave in the beginning. Know your why, and your why. What's your greater purpose? But I want to come back to a quote that you mentioned that I thought was wow, and I'm now understanding your quote a little bit more from what you're saying. You said that life gives way to resilience, persistence, and optimism. In other words, if you have those, you can push through it and become. Just before you answer that, if you've just tuned in, I'm David Zidel. I'm talking to Jon Foster Pedley, the Dean and Director of the Henley Business School. So, Jon, that quote of yours, life gives way to resilience, persistence, and optimism. Just unpack that for us a little bit.
Well, there are three characteristics. I mean, there's this idea of, excuse me, suitcase words. You take strategy, put a label on a suitcase, you open it up, and 100,000 different definitions of animals that strategy fly out. And so everyone just understands this in different ways. But resilience is an incredibly important attribute to have. And there's mental resilience, it's emotional resilience, it's physical resilience, and just the capacity to, be knocked down and stand up again. Because if you don't get knocked down, if you don't have your heart broken, you don't get fired occasionally, you don't fail sometimes, you're not ever going to know how to recover. As Mandela said, how to pick yourself up again. And you have to learn that much. You have to learn how to recover. And again, once you know you can recover, you're not so scared of being knocked down again. And so that you have to learn. You can't read it in a book and say, I've got it. You've got to live that through life. And that means you've got to experiment, to try things and push the boundaries and have high standards. And that's another thing I would say, that you really do need to have high standards, not perfectionism, which I would label as a pathology, but high standards. And so that's resilience. And persistence is allied to that, but it's just keeping on at it. I remember when I was trying to get my flying licenses and all that, there were any number of people who were all working way up, trying to get the hours through flying instructor with a dream to work in the airlines. And it seems so improbable that any one of them, characters all, some you would think would never fly an airplane safely. And they did, by the way. And I've seen all of those just by persisting and just carrying on, getting what they wanted. They got into airlines. They got some really phenomenal airline captains. Some retired now, some are running major businesses. They just carried on at times when it seems so improbable. Life gives way to that. And I don't think life gives way to cynicism, although there is some research that shows that people who are cynical and negative are often perceived to be more intelligent than the optimists and naive, Pollyanna optimists. It's not true, though. It's actually much, much harder to maintain a sense of optimism and a camaraderie and a belief in your fellow person than to be cynical, which is really a defeat in life, I think. Being cynical is a defeat, and Viktor Frankl talked about this, of course, there's wonderful, wonderful books he wrote about his time and how he survived the concentration camps and built up the idea of logotherapy. And then he talked about, that tragic optimism, living in spite of death and suffering, whatever. These are really fundamental attributes which I think we all have to take. And the combination of those three things I've seen take people in so many different gang bosses to students and whatever, from people in engineering now to be entrepreneurs and running business, entrepreneurs into being philanthropists or engineers, whatever. They've gone totally different ways. And they've just done something which seems so improbable at the time, but it never is that improbable. It's just the virus in our head that says that's difficult or that's weird, it doesn't fit our pattern. That's the problem.
So the book you're referring to from Viktor Frankl, I think it's Man's Search for Meaning.
That's right.
And where's the difference between when you're saying being persistent of just carry on and carrying on and carrying on, where somebody says there's a definition of stupidity, which is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Where's that separation between being stupid and being persistent? We
used to say the same thing about pilots. So pilots say, well, I've got 20,000 hours and I've got 10,000 hours, and 20,000 hour pilot is obviously superior. In some ways, obviously is. But actually, if you've got 20,000 of the same hours, it's very different than 10,000 varied hours under, or 5,000 under great stress and difference. You're going to do it. So persistence, continually persisting and never know when to give up on something, that's another skill you need. But you do need to be able to persist. But there is a limit where it just becomes sheer doggedness, where it just becomes really does become stupid. But we judge that stupidity point far too early, I think, sometimes. And by the way, don't get me wrong, if it's dangerous, generally dangerous, then don't do it unless you worked out the safety. Don't jump off that cliff like my wife is doing, I'm saying at the moment. Don't jump off that cliff without double or triple check that you've got the knots right and everything is right. So do your work. But I think it's very true. You can continue on by being persistent, but there's an underlying characteristic, which is you also need to be very aware. There's something we talked about. I'm talking flying a lot now, but situational awareness or airmanship. And what airmanship is, an indefinable character, which you would see in any great CEO or any great manager or any great human, of being really in tune with what's going on around the people, what's happening, being able to scan the environment and not being completely focused on one issue, because you get too target orientated, you've got no peripheral vision, psychologically or physically, actually, so strangely enough. So you actually have to be able to have the physical, and you also have to be able to reflect on now. So you tried something, but you also have to have another superpower, which is observation, reflection, absorbing what it is, taking time, and letting those insights come to you. Because sometimes you can't force epiphanies. Epiphanies come in their own way, in their own time, in the shower. Where did that idea came from? I suddenly understood it, and like from nowhere, but your unconscious brain has been working on it for so long. And we need to give ourselves space for that and to be imaginative and creative. We don't do that nearly enough, because those are the attributes that really make a magnificently huge difference to success. The ability to be resourceful, not just have resources, to imagine, not just to think, and to allow, insights to come to you. So I think that's part of what you need as well as persistence. You need those other attributes. Yeah.
And the optimism, they say that people who think they're lucky are normally luckier than people who think they're not. And it just reminds me of a story of my dad, who he used to love telling the story, and he was quite an optimistic person, but he used to tell the story of somebody jumping off a building, off the 50th floor, and as he's falling to his death, and he goes past like the 21st floor, and someone says, "How are you doing?" And he says, "Well, so far so good." But sometimes
story of all our lives, really, isn't it? But anyway,
but it's about being optimistic in the right situation.
Yeah, you're living. I mean, you're alive. What's the point of being so negative? I mean, you do it to protect yourself, or because you've lost touch, whatever. And there's no shame in that. I mean, we all go there, and you can't be this positive person smiling around all the time. But you also have got to understand that, optimism is a developed characteristic. And I'm not Pollyannish optimism. You've got to think that, well, we can get out of this, we can do something. And for that, you need to suspend some judgment and suspend some of your quite fundamental core beliefs that this is the way to do things. If you are trying something and it's not working, you are going to have to do it in a different way. And that might be a technique, it might be actually a mindset, or it might be a core belief or assumption about life, which you actually got to be open to those things coming to you. And being optimistic allows you to consider openness, and being closed and pessimistic often forces you down a narrow channel. So it's hard to do.
Well, it's fantastic. So if you can have those three things of resilience, persistence, and being optimistic, you can achieve that. If you've just tuned in, I'm David Zidel. I'm talking to Jon Foster Pedley, the Dean and Director of the Henley Business School. And when we come back, we're going to go for a break. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you specifically around the Henley Business School.
Sure.
How did you grow a business like that, where you've got so many competitors from, and I don't remember the number of students, maybe 30 odd students graduating to now graduating over 2,000 students. So it's a great success story, and we'll unpack that when we get back.
Thanks.
Welcome back. I'm David Zidel, and I'm in discussion with Jon Foster Pedley, and you heading up a business school, and as I said just before the break, where you grow from 30 students through to 2,000 students graduating. Take us through maybe some of the battles, some of the issues. How did you go through that? And maybe using your own thing, how were you resilient? How were you persistent? And how did you keep your optimism through the journey?
I will. Of course, the optimism comes from family. I mentioned them before, Carla, Kira, and also the team you work with. All that comes, all those add value to life, and also your sense of purpose. But I think if you understand when you take a job, you're not going to know the answer straight away. You've got a map of the territory you came from. It doesn't fit the new territory. So you've got to learn to unpack that quickly, and that's important. But when I joined Henley, I've been having a really good time at University of Cape Town, set up and run their executive MBA down there. So I head up their executive education. I ran an entrepreneurship center, an innovation center in the deep south of New Zealand for a while, teaching entrepreneurship and helping entrepreneurs build up, and I enjoyed that. But coming to Henley was really interesting because we're part of an international university called the University of Reading, and part of that is Henley Business School, which is a very well-known business school, will be 80 years old this year. And it's at various times, it's been all the way around the world and a very established thing. And Henley had a small operation here with a licensed MBA to the previous organization that used that. So it licensed the MBA, and that organization was sold by the owner at that time into a company called EduCore. And then it split, and the MBA was set up as a separate company, a very small company down here, really as a marketing office and a support office for people learning here. But it was well done. And Henley is a triple accredited business school, which is 1% of business schools go through the audit process of the USA, etc. So it had a lot of background and a lot of substance to it. But it wasn't doing very much here, and what it was doing was fine. It was nice. Henley was bought out by Reading until 2008, and they were interested in developing their international growth. So they had just one MBA, that's all they had, and really was an operating office. I was brought in to try and build that. And I immediately realized that we had a tiger by the tail because we had this fantastic international brand and lots of deep attributes, but it was still really only an office for marketing. So we decided to set up, let's set up a really good, standalone business school and see how big we can get this in terms of providing value, hopefully developing later into much bigger. So we're still working on that. And we had 5 people in an office. We had a very small turnover. We had a few students doing on the MBA. It was a good vibe, but people liked it. But we had plenty of debts at the time because we had to turn around something with we had to reestablish the university. In fact, all the business schools at the time had been thrown out of South Africa by the Council on Higher Education because of their accreditation, because of their academic rigor, I think, and they weren't really contributing. We were very luckily, and because of very good work by some people I'm working with, given accreditation here as a private business school, albeit part of an international business school at university. And so we said, well, what should we do? And the first thing we started to do was saying, well, right, we've got no money. In our growth, we've never received any, apart from one small thing last year, any subsidy of any sort. No government subsidy. We've never received any loans. We've never received any capital injections. We've grown completely organically on our own skills, and also paying some money back to our owners in the UK at the same time. So it was a really exciting challenge. I thought we'd have a go at it. But I remember us working at that, and we said, well, let's grow the MBA. Let's get some executive education. And we were very lucky to get some clients, great clients like Eskom, who done so much good work for us. So it's tragic to see what they went through. It was full of good people. And we started to try and build it up. I'll talk a little bit about strategy at some point, because we took a very different strategy approach. I've been teaching strategy for 15 years at UCT, so I'd come to some conclusions about what works and doesn't work in strategy, which are also slightly counterintuitive and certainly counter orthodoxy of strategy. So we tried those unorthodox approaches, and they absolutely worked. So we then built it, and then started step by step adding new programs, doing more things, and really focusing on the why. So it's very interesting. You talked about Simon Sinek. I remember sitting in an office looking out from the campus we're in now, and looking out over Joburg, and just visualizing this huge Gini coefficient difference. Worst Gini coefficient in the world.
So just to unpack that for people who don't understand it, so the Gini coefficient is really saying, if I've got it correctly, the difference from the earnings from the highest earners to the lowest earners in a country. And that difference, the bigger the difference, the greater the Gini coefficient. And I think South Africa is one of the greatest or the greatest Gini coefficient in the world.
It has the greatest as well. more money in fewest hands and least money in most hands of any country, along with close to Lesotho, etc. And it's not a great thing. Highest unemployment record. But I'm not going down those. These are all things that we can, with luck and work, we can change. And then there's the education thing. So 100 people start school in South Africa, and great, So, how many people can one imagine of those 100 get a degree within 5 years of leaving school? And you will think, oh, maybe 30, maybe 20. It's actually 4.
Wow.
4. So of 96 start school and don't get a degree within 5 years. And that has to change. In the UK, it's 50, 55%. They're going for 70. When you look at what's happening in Korea, where they pull the people, the professors in from the Korean diaspora and really focused on education. Same in Singapore, same in so many countries, have an obsession with education for the people. Not because education is a public good, it's not a private good. You cannot possibly build, an institution, let alone a country, let alone a company without education. So these were the things I thought about at that moment, yeah.
So education, you're really saying if somebody goes to learn something, you're not being selfish. You're not just learning it for yourself. You're learning it, and it helps much broader than yourself. It's got a bigger purpose.
I mean, how can you possibly imagine we could grow South Africa with, 3/4 or whatever of the people in South Africa stuck without resources, without poverty? And of course, there is a sort of, like racism and classism, I think there's something called povertism, which is a sort of sense that if you are well off and you look at poor people, there's something, if you don't watch out, that says, well, they're stupid, they're not working hard, they're never going to do it. And that is so absolutely, viscerally, fundamentally wrong and demonic. And the reason is we've seen thousands of people cross our stage now, and 1/4 of the auditorium is the students. 3/4 is, guess what? It's the families. Come from all over South Africa with the kids, the uncles, the ums, from all cultures and races sitting. And what are they celebrating? Their hearts are swelling with pride. They're remembering 2 generations of labor, sometimes in menial labor, whatever, and they're watching their sons and daughters now graduating. And so that's what we saw. So I looked over Joburg and I thought, what is the purpose of a business school? It's not to be elitist and give people, the corner office. It's to create cornerstones of a magnificent development of a country, and you have to believe in the people. And the people we've been teaching, coming from those backgrounds, are as intelligent as anybody I know. And what's more, the MBA students who are doing the MBA in the same cohort as Germans, as Finns, as British, the MBA students pass at the same, if not better rate, in blind test exams marked overseas as those Germans, British. So we have the capability in South Africa. Let's darn well believe it.
Fantastic. We're going to go for another ad break, and we're running out of time here, but I do want to cover 2 things.
Right.
The one thing is that Campari. We have to cover that, and then if you can touch a little bit on the strategy as well.
Sure.
But I'm David Zidel. We're talking to Jon Foster Pedley, and we'll be back after this. Welcome back. I'm David Zidel, talking to Jon Foster Pedley, the Dean and Director of Henley Business School. And Jon, early on, we shared the story that you actually you embarked on your success through a bank manager giving you a loan. You didn't understand it. Years later, you found out that he followed something called the Campari method or system. I'm not sure what that is. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
So I was living in Jersey, which is like financial capital, tax haven, all that. And I was living not like Jersey residents do. If you come in like I did, you're lucky if you're able to hire a rented room. And I was able to hire a renter. I couldn't have a lease. I just had to do that. And that was that's how they keep that very exclusive Jersey. And I was, selling used airplanes and having a wild time being entrepreneurial about that. It was a really interesting time. But I really wanted to fly, and I got some flying hours. So I went to see, I said, wow, it's going to cost me some money. Look, I've got nothing. Okay, I'll go to the bank manager. So I walked into the middle of St. Helier and this very posh, bank, Barclays Bank. And I said, can I see the manager, please? So, yeah, sure. Come in. My name's Mr. Berman. Sit down. What do you want? So, well, I'd like to borrow some money, please. And what for? And so I said, well, I'm a flying instructor. I'm doing all this and I'm really keen. So we chatted. He asked me a number of questions and then came to the point and said, what's your collateral? I said, well, what's collateral? I don't know. I've got a suitcase. I've got a toolbox. I've got an old guitar. That's all I've got in life, really. apart from everything that my parents gave me and everyone else gave me, which was substantial, God bless them. And so he told me, he said, okay, I'll give you the money. I said, thanks. And Campari is, and how I found out about this, about a year or so, I went back to Henley for an alumni dinner. And it was, I sat on a small table with a couple of people. One of them was the chair of court of the Bank of England, which is basically the chairman of the Bank of England. So he was a guy giving a talk that day. Super nice guy. We got on very well. And I told him this story because he'd worked for Barclays, and I said how grateful I was to Barclays. See how many times I've name dropped Barclays. Absolutely. So do a favor to somebody, they'll tell you about it all the rest of their life. I told probably tens of thousands of people about Barclays and how grateful I was to them. And he said, no, those days we had this idea called Campari. I said, what's that? He said, well, the first thing you did when you're going to do a loan was not work out your capacity to pay or what the return rate was. You started with C, character. What is the character of this person? So you spend time looking. And I always say I passed some subliminal test of his. This guy's mad enough to actually do this and probably pay it back. And so Campari was also, has he got the character? And they would really work on a character. And I think that was the main thing. Once that was settled in their mind that this was somebody, my judgment, my intuitive and life judgment is somebody I should give money to. And I'm personally very keen on this approach too. Then look at the ability to repay. I was going to get a job, I'd be able to pay a bit, work out the terms. What's the margin he's going to get, which was reasonable, I guess. What's the purpose of it? Is it because I want to fritter this away or because I have a deep and abiding desire to do something in my life? Was I driven, which I was? What is the amount? Could he affordable? What's the repayment schedules? And what insurances are? I couldn't offer him much insurance. So I think I passed enough of those for him to give me money. And of course, I then went back to him twice afterwards. So he was into me for a bit more, but I've never forgotten Mr. Berman and the bank. And I was able then to borrow more money, become a senior flying instructor and then a commercial pilot. But what struck me was how important that algorithm was, starting with character, and how that in the search for efficiencies and scalability and really working on returns, that of course you're going to do well, but you're going to lose something. You will scale, but you're going to miss a few of those absolutely critical people who don't fit the people, and some of those people are going to be the absolute stars. It's no accident that Richard Branson is so deeply dyslexic, or so many people who are successful in creative environments are ADD, or so many people in academia elsewhere that are somehow neurodivergent. There's no accident that they have really focused skills where in the right context, they will shine. And so we've kind of homogenized things in that way. And so we don't do that. Trust your gut and believe in character.
Wow. And I think that's a great thing. That the character is the key thing at the end. I'd love to at some stage ask you about strategy, but
another
day. So just looking at this, I think for success and for building that resilience, that persistence, and that optimism, you have to try new things, as you said. And trying new things builds up and gives you the confidence that allows you to try other new things and knowing that you can survive. And one of the other things you said is don't try the same thing, try different things, because then you learn different skills. And what's important is family. You need your family, you need the bigger purpose. Yeah. And that becomes the cornerstone. And maybe after this, we can go have a Campari and see what our true characters are. So, Jon, I really want to thank you so much for being here today, for sharing of your knowledge. And to you listening in your car at home, I hope this has taught you a little bit, because what we're trying to do here is to give you business stories, but business stories with meaning, a business story educational. And as I said in the beginning, you need your why, and that's our why. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.